next to a fire. And the first night, screaming starts. Wolfgang actually saw the creature run past him. Second night, Randy experiences it. And it's a very interesting encounter. Wolfgang had sent me, he went back to his parents' property. He sent me a copy of a recording he took from the porch of his parents' home, and I'll be playing that here shortly in the show. But they described this scream, and I have some audio I'm going to play for the guys and see if it's the same type of scream that they heard. Sometimes I speak to witnesses and they don't want to come on the show, and I've said in the past that's completely fine. I still love talking to people. I still gather information from talking to a lot of witnesses. And most of the time, what you guys hear on the show, you know, I've spoken to anywhere from 8 to 12 people before that one really is willing to come on the show, like Wolfgang and Randy. But I spoke to a lady yesterday out in West Virginia, and they just moved into this property about a year ago. They've been hearing a lot of strange sounds at night. And her property, on her home, it's surrounded by windows. And she says sometimes late at night, she'll see shadows of what look like people walking away. And she's been finding these large prints on her property. So I asked her to send me some pictures, and I posted those to the blog on April 21st, Sasquatch on the Property. And she's been sending me pictures, and I'll be updating that blog with more photos. But what was interesting is I talked to her son, who's in high school. And he was oblivious to the prints. He was oblivious to the sounds at night. I know the mother, the main witness, she has been kind of keeping that under wraps, not really saying a whole lot to the family about what she's been hearing. Just her and her husband have been talking about it. Didn't really want to scare the kids, so they never really said anything as far as the evidence they're finding. Well, recently, her son's coming home from school, and he's riding on the bus, and he sees what he thinks is a large orangutan on 2 legs standing up looking at him. And as he's getting off of the school bus, it kind of turns and walks away and disappears in the brush. So I spoke to the son, and he said, yeah, it just looked like this huge, large orangutan type creature looking at him. He didn't really know what it was. He thought it was just an overgrown orangutan living out there. You know, he had no clue. But it was interesting to talk with him. Shortly after he had that sighting, the mother of the home was up late one night, and she's watching TV. And so she turns the TV off, and there's a light on the outside of their front porch. And she sees a shadow, what appears to be looking through the front door, looks like a person. And as she turns and looks, it walks off the porch. And she was just freaked out, didn't know what was going on. The dog mainly stays inside the home. The dog sleeps under the bed at night. Things are getting a little bit different. She said when they first moved in, the dog would run around, sleep in its bed in the living room, sometimes sleep up on the bed. But it's interesting because now the dog's starting to sleep under the bed. So she goes to bed, wakes up the next morning, and goes out to look at that front door. And what she saw was this imprint of what looked like an ape's face smudge on the door. And if you blow up that picture, you can kind of see it. It looks primate-ish, a big smudge looking at her door. But she's sending me other pictures. There's a picture of a window that's about 8-9 feet off the ground that actually has handprints on it. It looks like huge handprints on it. She's finding footprints. She says late at night around 1-2 o'clock in the morning, you'll hear strange vocalizations. A lot of different things going on around the property. So I hope she keeps me updated on what's going on out there. Again, she's declined to come on the show, which is completely fine. But I hope she keeps me updated on what's going on out there. She said there really hasn't been anything violent. They're not banging on the house or anything like that. It wasn't until she found the tracks and then her son, and now she's finding these smudges on the window. So it's a developing story. And I'll let you guys know if I get any updates on it. The other thing from the 21st, I was sent this email from this police officer, and he said, I never really believed in Sasquatch before. I always thought it was kind of old fables, old stories that people just told. He never really put too much into it. And after he's been listening to the show, he sent me this long email. He explained that he listens every night when he's out on patrol, and he truly believes there's something out there. After hearing all these witnesses, He told me, it's just there's too many correlations between what one witness says to another, and they live in different states. So being a police officer and listening to these witnesses, he said it's the emotions that they're portraying as they tell the stories. He said it's a lot like when he investigates and he talks to witnesses of a crime or anything like that. He said it's just there's too many things for him to look past this now. So he's been really looking into the subject. Well, what's interesting is he get pulled someone over for suspected of DUI. And so he walks around, and the guy said he's been out bow fishing with his girlfriend. He went through and gave this guy a sobriety test, which he passed with flying colors. But what's interesting is the guy he pulled over said, "Sir, I need to ask you something. Have you ever seen anything weird?" Obviously, the cop's going to respond back with, he sees weird stuff all the time. Being that he's a police officer, I'm sure on a daily basis he does. But the witness said, "No, in the woods. Have you ever seen anything strange in the woods?" And as I responded back with the police officer, he said this guy was really shook up. He wasn't drunk. He was just really shook up. And he said what he heard was a bunch of strange noises. He heard a loud growl and then what sounded like a roar. And he had no idea what it was. No explanation for the sound at all. But right after he heard the roar, he heard a coyote yip, as if it had been hurt or something like that. And they heard all these different vocalizations, and so the man and his girlfriend leave. They get out of there. But by the time the cop had pulled him over, he was still really shook up. And the cop's comments were that he was very much concerned, worried, scared. He really, really shook up. And it's interesting because I talked to a guy, probably, I want to say almost 2 months ago, and he was in Texas, and he said he was out hunting, and he heard a roar, what sounded like a lion roaring. And it was starting to get dark, and he heard a coyote yip, almost like it had been snagged up. And it reminded me of what this witness had told the police officer, what he had heard. Fascinating stuff. I'm trying to keep that blog updated for you guys, so there's enough in between shows to kind of keep things interesting. But I appreciate you guys listening tonight. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Well, let's jump right into it tonight. Wolfgang and Randy. Hey, guys, I really appreciate you guys being here tonight.
Thank you, Wes.
And if you would, Wolfgang, kind of start from the beginning. Tell us, just walk the audience right into what happened, and then we'll move to Randy.
Sure. Well, there's this place that I really liked when I was a kid. My dad showed me. It was about a mile from their house. He took me back there. I think he took us morel mushroom hunting at one time. And we found a series of caves. The caves were like underneath like some hills where there were some pine trees and with like really thick bedding of pine. So that just became my spot to go play with friends. So any friend that I made, we'd go back there and we'd play. We weren't allowed to play in the caves, although there were a couple times where we ventured into those caves. That just became the regular spot. And I was the kind of kid, if I got annoying enough, my parents would just say, go play in the woods. So there was many times where I would just go out by myself, that just wasn't uncommon back then. I think in the 80s, you just send your kid off to go play in the woods.
Yeah, I did the same thing. And this was in Ohio, right?
Yes, Stark County, Ohio, pretty close to Route 30. Flash forward, I'm a teenager now. It's 1991. My only real concerns were girls and making enough money for rent or partying. But I had this really terrible argument with my girlfriend. I wanted to get away from it all, and I felt self-sufficient. I was trying to prove myself all the time, in the woods, and I was a big survival guy. So was Randy. So I asked my friends to go camping with me. They couldn't, but they said that they'd go out and help me set up a camp. So, we get out there, very normal. I mean, I was stressed, obviously totally stressed because of the girl situation. But it was good to be out there because that was the one place I could go to because it's just this really awesome clearing of pine trees. And, like, if you lay at a certain spot, like in the middle of these pine trees, you could look up and see the sky. just really beautiful in that area. So they go with me. They help me set up a camp. You know, I mean, it was getting late. They had to be up in the morning to go to work. So they bid farewell, and I had my fire going. Nice, peaceful night. Nothing scary, you know. I didn't feel like I was being watched or anything weird like that. I mean, I'd gone camping by myself before, and I fell asleep. So a little while passes, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I wake up and I feel just super uneasy. I don't know. Something felt weird. And I was cold. I thought, well, maybe I just woke up from a bad dream. And so I start blowing on the fire to get it going again so I could warm up. And then I heard it. And it was just, it's the scream that everybody talks about. Just a horrendous scream. It's sort of like a whoop and a scream combined into one. It like goes in and out in a weird way that you know that a deer wouldn't make, or even a bear. So I was like, what the heck is that? And I know I'm just sitting there and I'm just stunned. And I hear another scream from a different part of the camp. And I believe that was coming from, there's a little valley about 50 yards from where my camp was, where you could go through there unnoticed. And I think it was coming from that end. So I'm hearing these screams and I'm trying to figure out what's going on and what it is. I'm trying to make sense of it because it sounds like something I would hear on like National Geographic Channel, like an ape. And it's totally freaking me out. And then this thing runs right alongside my camp, about 15, 20 feet away. It just grazes my camp, running to the direction where the other scream's coming from. And it wanted to be seen. I could tell it wanted to be seen. It was really big. Everybody says 7.5, 8 feet tall. I don't think it was that tall. I think it was probably 6'5", maybe. But the important part was it just ran funny. It looked funny. It didn't look like a person running. It was far more smooth, sleek. I don't know what you call it. It was very catty looking. Had the sort of short black hair. I'd say it was dark hair. It could have been dark brown. I don't know. So it runs by my camp, and right away, like all these flashes are coming to me. Like, what's this thing going to do? Is it going to come back? And the screamings in the meantime are continuing. And the only thing I could think of to do was, you know, what my dad taught me when I was a kid. Don't run from a wild animal. So I just got up. I left everything there. I had my glasses on. I had left my machete, my blankets. I just took my flashlight and my ego and walked out of the woods. So when I got to the main road, I literally booked it. I Jesse Owened it all the way up the street to get to my mom and dad's house because I didn't have a car. It was Randy and Tony that had brought me. So I'm pounding on the door at probably 3 o'clock in the morning, and my mom finally comes out. And she's like, what happened? What's going on? So I start to tell her the story, and my dad, he was a truck driver, so he was working nights. He came in right when we were talking, and I explained, of all the people I expected not to believe me is my dad, because he spent more time in the woods, you know, hunting and fishing than anybody I know. And he had never seen anything like that. So I tell them, they know that I'm totally shaken up, you know. And, you know, I went to bed after that. I didn't know what to think. I had to get some sleep. I woke up in the morning. It was almost like it was all a bad dream that happened. So right away, I went and I talked to Randy and Tony, and I told them what happened. And, you know, I mean, we're kids practically, so they're probably half wondering if I was bullshitting them or not. And I said, well, guys, I still have my stuff out there. You know, I left my machete, my blanket. Can you go out there with me and help a pal out so I don't have to go back there alone, you know? I mean, I was still pretty shaken up. I was scared. And they were like, yeah, sure, we can go back with you. I don't think that they really, really, truly believed it, not until night 2. And they were like, well, why don't we just go camping then, since we're going back there anyway? And obviously I was hesitant, but I was like, well, if we are this time, we need to take like a tape recorder so we could record these things. And we did, you know.
Wolfgang, so you weren't in a tent, right?
No, I never slept in a tent. I always slept under the stars.
Wolfgang, was this a scream that you heard? I have one queued up here I want you to listen to. Was it anything like this?
Yeah, definitely. It was a little more drawn out, though. Each scream was drawn out. Like it lasted maybe a fraction of a second longer than what you played. It was so like, I don't know, it was just bone chilling. Like every single time was like a rack on your nerves. Like every single time it would do that, it was a new sensation of nerve wracking. And so you literally, it's definitely a noise like you don't want to be around for too long. So that, you know, that just tells me get out. You know?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I heard that down in Texas, and I described it like a demon screaming, like a female demon just screaming.
Yeah.
And it scared the crap out of me when I heard it. I can imagine laying out underneath the stars, you know, no tent. Not that a tent protects you, but I guess it's more of a mental protection. So you guys go back. Yeah. You get Randy and you get another friend, and you guys go back. And Randy, what happened?
Okay. So Wolfgang came to Tony and I and told us the story of what happened to him the night before, and I believed him somewhat because things that I had experienced as a kid. I heard that sound when I was a kid, but I didn't know it. We both had one night we were out playing outside and we were running toward the house and we heard it, and we both froze in our tracks because we didn't know what it was. So growing up out in the woods, you hear a lot of different things, but I had never heard that sound before. And so when he came to us, like, well, something definitely happened, and we're going to be his friends. We're going to go out there with him, and we're just going to make it like a cookout. He didn't think it was going to happen in any way, shape, or form again because he didn't believe things like that were going to happen twice. And so we just made a night of it, just a guy's night camping, and we got a cooler, we got hot dogs, chips, bread, all kinds of snacks that Tony had brought, and we went to make a guy's cookout night, camping out under the stars. I had been camping all the time as a kid too, either with Wolfgang or some other friends of ours, and we had never used tents. It's just the way it was. We didn't need them. We just needed to be in our bags beside the fire. And we just talked most of the night. We're talking about usual guy things. Girls. Guys talk girls and things of that nature. Basically, it was the same kind of thing he was describing on his night, except, there were three of us. Tony. I mean, Tony was the Boy Scout, so he had all kinds of stuff with him. His cot. He had to lay out his cot. He wouldn't lay on the ground like we did. We were fine with the ground because of the pine needle bedding there. It was soft. I mean, it was if you could imagine a thick layer of pine needles on the ground, and they're soft. It makes a nice mattress.
Like a bed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are going old school on it. And so what happens next? You guys are sitting around the fire, and do you hear anything at this point?
No. Mm-mm.
It was just the usual, what you would normally hear out camping in the woods here in Ohio. Is there really bird noises and wind and through the trees and stuff like that. The next thing I remember was waking up, and there were some distinct things that I remember when I woke up. And I didn't know what time it was, but it was dark. And there was no noise at that moment when I woke up at all. In other words, no crickets, nothing. It was like there was a strange stillness in the air, like nothing was moving. And that was the first thing that panicked me, because that doesn't normally happen.
basically you had the same feeling that I had the first night. And the thing is Randy and I have not talked about this in years. So this is interesting to hear his perspective on it because we literally have not talked about it in like 20 years. Go ahead, Randy. Sorry.
Right. That was unnerving to begin with. Complete silence was unnerving, and the fire had died out for the most part. I was kind of wondering to myself, why am I awake? What is going on? And then that's when I heard it. I heard that same sound that he's describing, and I was freaked out, but I wasn't. I was in, okay, what am I supposed to do? I'm the one here with the recorder. I have a responsibility. We had this, we had taken this Radio Shack big boombox kind of tape recorder thing.
It was junk.
With the old cassette tape. Yeah, it was junk, but it worked. And I actually had it set to record just in case because Wolfgang had asked me to. He said, well, if that sound happens, I want to get a recording of it. So it was beside me, and the first time I heard it, I was like, okay. I reached down and I hit the unpause so it would start recording. And then after that is when I said, did you hear that? And I said, are you awake? Or something like that to Wolfgang. And he said, yeah, I'm awake. I heard it. Well, first we started whispering, Tony, did you hear that? Are you awake? And he wouldn't respond to us. And we both kind of were trying to see if he was awake. So then I reached over and shook his cot. He says, I'm awake. But he was very...
He was awake. Mm-hmm.
But he wouldn't move. He was frozen. We were like, well, we got to get out of here.
What's going through let me ask both of you guys at this point, what's going through your mind?
I'm waiting for it to come out. I'm waiting for it to come out again. I kept looking to see if it was going to spring by the camp or spring into the camp. I mean, I don't know what you'd call that. I mean, it wasn't really a bluff charge because it didn't charge for me, but I was waiting for that to happen again. So I kept looking at the tree line to see if I could see anything, but it was probably just standing out there, like as a tree.
And when you saw it that first night, Wolfgang, was it on 2 legs or was it on 4 legs when it ran by?
Absolutely 2 legs, and they weren't like long like a man's legs, although it was still tall. I mean, it just looked like a big gorilla, but with man legs is the only way I can explain it, but shorter. But it didn't hobble around like primates do. I mean, it ran really fast.
And what are you thinking at this point, Randy? You haven't seen it. You just heard what Wolfgang said the night before. Now you're hearing the screams. What's going through your mind at this point?
Well, I wasn't really sure where it was because the noises were coming from 2 different directions, and I couldn't tell how close it was to us. I'm not one of these kind of people that just get frozen like Tony. I mean, I know it's fight or flight. So I had to do something. And since I couldn't identify where it was coming from or what it was, there was no way to fight this. So it was, do what Wolfgang had said he did the night before and get out of there was the basic idea. I did not know. I was kind of disoriented when I woke up, so I didn't exactly know which direction would be the way out, but Wolfgang did. So I was following him. I don't know that Wolfgang and I were scared out of our minds. We were in go mode. We were in the, something just takes over when okay, we've got to get out of here. This is what we need to do. But Tony was clearly shaken up. And it took a few minutes to get him going. So in the meantime, these things were screaming all around us and basically telling us to get out of there. And we're just trying to keep our composure at that time. And then, so when we finally did get him to move, and we headed in the direction following Wolf, some of the, you're just in a hurry, so we're kind of, sliding down hills and through brush and not even caring about briars or whatever else. You're just getting out of there. So I think we got scratched up a little bit.
And again, we left everything. We left it all.
Yeah. Well, I know. I took the tape recorder.
Yeah,
I was carrying that.
Recorder,
That was the only thing.
Yeah.
But the noises kept going on, but they were getting further and further behind us. And I kept scanning around to see if I could see anything as we were going. And I did not see anything moving, but I heard it.
Do you think the screams are directed at you guys?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I do.
Yeah, I mean,
because considering they stopped once we left, I mean, we couldn't hear anything once we left.
Yeah, once we were down on the
main path.
It's like the main path, main road, whatever you want to call it. I mean, not main road, but main. It's like you could drive up in there, but it's not really a road. And so we, once we got down there, it seemed to stop.
What's the conversation like? The three of you guys get out of there, and now you're away from it screaming. What are you guys talking about at this point?
We're not really talking about anything until we get to my mom and dad's place, and we're checking the recorder to see if we can prove to my mom and dad that something happened out there, you know. And we did get a recording, but we weren't tech savvy, so we turned the volume all the way up when we were recording, and we caught mostly motors from the recorder running. But you could still hear the screams on the recorder.
Tony wasn't talking at all, not the whole time.
No.
He just sat there.
My mom and dad, they knew, again, something really scary happened, and they heard the recording, and I think my parents believed me more then. But, I mean, we wanted it for our own satisfaction, just to say, oh, here, we can prove we heard and saw Bigfoot. Here's the screams. So we had that at least. But, I mean, time passed, and we just didn't even think about it or care about it anymore. You know, I mean, Randy had the tape. My mom, she saw on the news that Robert Morgan was in town, and he's a Bigfoot researcher. She got his number from the news, and I called Robert Morgan, and he interviewed both Randy and I. Tony did not come.
Why didn't Tony come?
He didn't want any part of it. Like I said, he thought it was a demon. He did not think it was Bigfoot. He thought it was a demon.
He still does. He wanted to put it behind him. He didn't.
Yeah, I tried talking to him about it like a month or so ago, and he's like, I'll get back to you. I'll let you, we'll talk about it. I'll get back to you. And he never did, so I could tell he just doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, and I can understand that. You know, they sound like a demon, I guess, if that's what demons sound like, when they're especially when they're screaming. They make a lot of different vocalizations. You know, they do everything from roars to chatter. You'll hear them mumble this weird chatter.
Yeah.
But the screams are terrifying. They are terrifying to listen to. It's like the recording I played for you guys. It doesn't seem like a happy vocalization by any means. It almost seems aggressive. It's not like a human screaming. It's almost more of an aggressive, angry when they scream.
Yeah. It didn't sound happy. It wasn't light whoops or anything like that. You know, it wasn't being playful. It was clearly trying to intimidate me, especially the first night. I think it came out the first night because it was just me. But there were three of us the second night, and that's probably why it didn't come out.
Now, when it ran past you in camp, I wanted to ask you, how close was it?
15, 20 feet.
Oh, wow. So it was really close when it ran past you.
Yes. Yeah. But like I said, I couldn't give you an estimate of how tall it was. I was on the ground. It could have been like 6'5" or so. I don't think it was really taller than that, but it looked big mass-wise. I mean, it just looked really strong. Upper body, low-set head. It did have sort of a pointy type of thing on its skull, you know, like, but it could have been like feathered hair looking, you know?
Yeah, and that first night, do you think it was just one creature when you were out there, Wolfgang? Do you think it was just the one?
No, because I heard the other creature screaming as this one ran through the camp, so I know for a fact there was more than one. I mean, there could have been even more than two.
And this is pretty close to your parents' house, isn't it?
Very close. It's literally like, it's probably not even a mile to the main road that my parents live on. Not even that. Like Robert Morgan, he came out and he looked at the site and he said, well, they have everything they need here. They have water because there's a nearby pond. There's caves that they could go into.
The sheltering. Yeah.
The soft pine beds, they probably wanted to sleep there. But, I mean, we went back to get our stuff the next day, which was quite interesting.
That was the strangest part.
That was pretty crazy because the Coleman cooler that Tony brought was open. We didn't leave it open. We didn't do that kind of thing. And so there was stuff pulled out of it. There were chips, like chip crumbs on the ground. None of the hot dogs had been touched. But the bread bags had been pulled open. There was no claw marks or anything. And the twisty ties were still on them, like they were closed, and they just pulled bread bags open and ate all the bread. Because I didn't have any hot dog buns with my hot dog the night before that. I don't think that they did either.
Well, we didn't. We hadn't opened the bags at all, the bread bags at all. And yeah, like he says, that twist tie was tied shut. It wasn't like some animal had chewed through it or clawed through it. It was like someone had taken two regular human-like hands and pulled the bag apart and took the bread right out.
Was there just that one piece of bread taken?
The whole loaf of bread or hot dog buns was just that the bread itself was gone and the bags were just there torn open with the twisty tie still on them, which, you know, could have been a raccoon, but considering the events of the night prior, probably wasn't a raccoon.
Usually raccoons will take their claws and you can kind of tell when it's been a raccoon. And I think a raccoon would be more interested in the hot dogs than the bread.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and the bag wasn't frayed at all. I mean, no claw marks, no teeth marks, nothing. It was a clean tear.
And what else did you guys find when you went up? Was that pretty much it?
That was pretty much it. We weren't like investigators or anything like that. We didn't know what to look for. So it was a dry summer anyway. So I don't think that and not to mention the pine bed is so thick, we wouldn't have found footprints there. I mean, I don't think we wanted to spend that kind of time out there after that happening. We just wanted to grab our stuff and go home. We figured we had enough proof to vindicate us, you know, from being liars about Bigfoot, you know, by having this tape, which unfortunately we handed this tape over to Robert Morgan and it was our only copy and we never got it back. So we lost our original evidence.
No, that's not true.
With that? No.
I had made a copy. I had made a copy.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know whatever happened to the copy either. I don't know.
It's probably got ABBA on it now.
Yeah, probably. I don't know.
Def Leppard's greatest hits.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that would, you're not far from your parents' house. That's something that would worry me. Because if you guys can make it back to the parent, your folks' house, they can make it back. Yeah. Have your folks never experienced anything out there?
Never. And my dad even has a garden there, so, and there's tons of deer in that area. You would think that you'd look out the back window and see Bigfoot picking tomatoes out of my dad's garden, but they've never seen it. I've never seen it. Just that one time when I went back to visit, I had to house sit my parents' house while they were gone in Florida. And, I went out on the porch, and that's when I recorded those whooping sounds. I was like, what the heck? That sounds a lot like what we heard back in 91. So I recorded it on an app on my phone. But other than that, I even asked some neighbors if they heard or saw anything strange, and they were all oblivious, I would like to know, because there's a guy that built a house like maybe a football field length away from the caves. I would love to knock on that guy's door and ask him if he's ever heard or seen anything back there.
Yeah, and I'll play those whooping sounds. And so you recorded those off of the back of your folks' is it off their back porch, or where did you get those from?
Front porch. I was right on the front porch, just going outside for a minute, and that's when that noise was happening, and I was like, I didn't know what to think. I went back inside. I'm starting to brush my teeth, getting ready for bed. I was like, I need to try to record that. And so I remembered I had a phone app that I could record stuff on. It's called WhatsApp. And I went outside and I recorded what I could that was left of it, because I could hear it was getting further away, and I think it was coming from the cornfield that's by my mom and dad's house.
Did either of you guys go back as the years went by? Did you guys ever go out there and take a look around?
Yes. Yes, because there's a few friends that I had that I told that story to, and they just had to go back there and see. You know, like I said, I went back with Robert Morgan. I think Randy was there too.
Yeah, I was.
I went camping again with another friend of mine, Chad, but nothing ever happened. Nothing ever came about. It was not like those 2 nights. I think those 2 nights were it. That was lightning striking twice in the same place.
Yeah, now I know I was looking at the notes here. There was a time in the early 80s from your notes, Wolfgang, that was it you and the same Tony were out and you guys saw what you thought was a gorilla?
Yeah, it looked like a monkey. We were just playing in the woods behind his parents' house and just having a good time. And we heard a noise, like rustling noise, and we looked over, and it looked like there was an ape climbing out of the tree. And we ran, his mom and dad's, just, went inside. And, I think we talked about it for like, what the heck was that? It looked like a monkey, And then, we forgot about it. We were kids. We didn't, it was like OCD or something. We just went on and did something else. I never thought, like, through the years, well, that could have been a Bigfoot. I just thought it was a monkey climbing out of a tree.
And Randy, did you ever go back out there? Did you ever experience anything out on that property?
No, I mean, I never went back out on that exact property. I've driven down by there many times, but I have not seen anything since then or heard of anything.
Has that affected you guys at all as far as that night and going back out or doing any sort of camping, or has it affected you since you guys had that encounter?
I think I don't have a problem going camping. I don't have a problem with that at all, really. It's not like, I mean, if something's going to happen, it's going to happen. You can't stop it from happening. I mean, you got to live your life. Camping there is not an option anymore. I mean, because now people, like Wolfgang said,
it's owned by
built houses. So, I mean, that's not even an option anymore right there. But as far as camping in general, I mean, I've done plenty of camping since then, and never had any more experiences like that.
What about you, Wolfgang?
I had nightmares for a good 20 years. I think when I moved to California, they toned down quite a bit. I still have them every once in a while, but they're not as bad. My nightmares now are more like, like I'm out with my girlfriend hiking. She and I went hiking in Yosemite last year, and I think that maybe sparked it. I don't know. But I have dreams that I see a Bigfoot, and I point to it. She looks, and it's gone, Like, I don't know what that's about, but that's how it's affected me. Like, it's got into my brain too much. I'll still camp. I still go hiking. In fact, I snuck out back to those caves several times a year and a half ago. I still love it out there. It's pretty awesome looking. But, like he said, we can't camp there because the owners there are pretty strict about people on their property.
Because Wolfgang actually saw it, I think it's definitely affected him a lot more. I only heard it. I never actually saw it. So, and maybe that's the difference between us here, is that he actually, witnessed it 15 feet from him. So that's going to stay with him for the rest of his life. I don't know how I would feel.
Yeah, I think Wolfgang made the right decision leaving that night, especially when you have them run by you like that. If they're screaming at you and they're running by you, it's escalating pretty quick. And I don't know that it's necessarily that they wanted the food. I think that was just icing on the cake after you guys left. I don't know that they really were making such a fuss over the food. I think that as soon as you guys left, they went in and, like I said, it was icing on the cake. You guys are gone now. We're going to see what you guys have.
I didn't have any food the first night, so they couldn't have wanted my food the first night. In fact, we got there like right at dusk. So, I mean, it was all a matter of like, how fast can I get a fire going and get my camp ready here before, nightfall. And so I didn't have food that night. It was just about getting out there and staying away from my girlfriend.
Yeah, and I understand that. You know, sometimes when you're fighting with your significant other, it's nice to kind of just go away. And the shame is you go out and you look for peace, you know, you're looking for serenity, and then you run into this, you know, it's 100 times worse than fighting with a girlfriend, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Do either of you guys look into this topic now? I know Wolfgang does. Do you, Randy?
Not so much, no. I mean, it's not that it doesn't interest me. I watch some shows sometimes. Every once in a while, I look at something on the internet, but it's not something that I, you know, you got to live your daily life. It's not that it's not in the back of my head or haven't thought about it. You know, it's just, you know, living the day to day, trying to pay the bills. So.
Well, I want to thank you guys for coming on, Randy and Wolfgang. I know. Thank you guys for making the time to come on. It's hard sometimes to schedule two guys, and I really do appreciate you guys coming on.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
Sure.
Well, thank you for having us on.
No problem.
You have an awesome show, and I'm going to continue listening to it. I want to hear what other people have to say. From the way it sounds, we were pretty darn lucky compared to other people, including yourself. I don't know what I would do if I had one blocking my way out.
Yeah, they can get aggressive. They definitely can be aggressive, and very territorial, which, you know, most primates, I mean, even humans are territorial. Non-human primates are very territorial. And I think that's really what you guys ran into that night. I think you guys were in their area, and it was their way of making you leave. And, you know, a lot of times when you listen to people's encounters, you kind of get the one warning to leave, and then as you stay there night after night after night, it ramps up. It gets more and more aggressive. And sometimes violent encounters do take place. I mean, sometimes things do get violent in those situations. I think you guys did the right thing on leaving, and I'm glad your buddies got to hear what you heard, Wolfgang. I know what it's, you know, it's tough when you're by yourself and
yeah, exactly.
Probably second-guessed yourself so much on, God, did that really happen, you know?
I am definitely thankful that my friends were there on that second night to sort of validate my claim from the first night. I mean, at least they know that I wasn't, you know, screwing around.
Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com.
Five, four, three, two, one.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you this evening. Going to be speaking to DW. He's a YouTuber for Dark Waters, and that was the intro to most of his shows. If you get a chance, go to YouTube, type in Dark Waters, and find his channel. He's been researching this for a long time. He mainly looks into Dogman, but he also looks into a lot of Sasquatch encounters. And he has gathered some great encounter stories. So he'll be sharing a lot of those stories with us tonight. Should be a great show. Remember, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, please check out the website, sasquatchchronicles.com. Become a subscriber, help support the show. The only other thing I'll throw at you guys is if you get a chance, please leave us a review on iTunes. Help us climb those charts on iTunes. Thanks so much, guys. Let's jump right into it tonight. I want to welcome DW to the show. DW, thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate you being here tonight.
Thanks, Wes. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I want to thank you for having me on your show. I'm a fan, and I listen, and I really, really enjoy it. And one of the things that I'm experiencing now is I'm going through a growth phase where I have to learn a lot more about the things that people are telling me. So when it comes to Sasquatch, I come to your channel to listen and learn as much as I possibly can, because I'm not the one who knows everything. You know, I'm a narrator, but I don't know everything about every cryptid out there. So I have to take time and educate myself on, you know, these different activities of these creatures. And so yours is definitely a source of my education.
I appreciate that, man. And for the listeners out there, if you go to YouTube and you search for Dark Waters, you will find the Dark Waters channel. I know the newest one he has up is 3 creepy stories from New Orleans. But, what's interesting is, you do a lot of Dogman type stuff on your show, and I know you're getting into the Bigfoot stuff. What got you into this? What got you into kind of narrating the stories?
Well, I spent a lot of time in the radio business, and I was looking for something to do that combined my my skills in producing radio shows along with my ability to, kind of get people to talk to me, because I really do believe I have a God-given gift to make friends and network. When I was trying to find a way to blend the two of them together, the way I figured that I could blend those two together was I needed to find something where I can interview people and then talk to them. Initially, it was going to start off as a regular kind of show where I talk to people and interview them. And then I said, no, why don't I do something better? Why don't I capture their emotions and recreate their events, the events that happened to them, and then go from there? And that is how the Dark Waters channel came to be. Initially, I was testing the waters with, and the people who listen, if they listen to the stories, the original stories, there's a computer voice to the stories, because I was just testing the stories themselves that I was getting to see if they were strong enough to carry water, and just testing my ability to kind of put together the things that happen to people. And then once I realized that, okay, well, I'm capturing the essence of what happened to them, then I started narrating myself. And a lot of that has to do with my subscribers, too, because my original 100 subscribers were like the best people that I could have ever had. I mean, these guys are so encouraging. They're phenomenal. We have some great people out here on this planet. We really do.
Did you start the channel because of your own encounter? I mean, you go into some of these creepy stories. Was there something that happened to you, or was it just a path you decided to take?
Well, I had plenty of things that happened to me that have been creepy out throughout my lifetime. And one of the things I touched on Darkness Radio was my family's connection to hoodoo and my interaction with the demon at 12 years old. And that was one of the things that opened my eyes to the paranormal world. But there have been so many things that have happened to me in my life that that just have I guess you could say you have an awakening at some point in time throughout your life. And it's that awakening, that great awakening in my life, that as you kind of see I call it the golden thread of life, as it kind of weaves itself together, and you see, this person connects to this person, and this incident connects to this, and everything leads up to something. Like, everything transpired to lead me up to having this interview with you. And my next interview, and each conversation that I have with people. And so when I see things going in that particular direction, I just go with it. I'm matured enough to know that, okay, you're going in this direction for a reason, and there's something there for you. So I kind of go along in that direction.
It is interesting how life throws you curveballs and it kind of steers you in weird directions. If you would have said to me 6 years ago, I'd be doing a Bigfoot podcast, I would have probably laughed at you over the whole thing. But, our experiences kind of shape our lives. Now, you've spoken to a lot of witnesses about Dogman, even a recent witness where it's popping heads off of raccoons. And what's going on at that property? And for the audience, just kind of walk them right into what's actually happening on this property.
That one, she hasn't signed her release yet. I tried to get her to sign the release. That's one that I can't get into just yet, but I can walk you through another one that's in southeast Louisiana that I have all the permissions on. And this one is outside of Houma. I'm not going to give the exact location because, like we talked about yesterday, I really don't like how people go chasing these things down. But so there's this gentleman, and he's a fisherman. And when I say he's a fisherman, like, he's one of those guys that spends all his time in the bayou, and he has a dog named Buck. So he and Buck go out all the time early in the morning, especially during redfish season. They go fishing for redfish. And this is something that I'm finding real peculiar about Dogman himself, the Dogman itself, because it's like this creature is a master at intimidating people. I call it a cryptid terrorist. That's what I call it, because the things that it does is intended to terrorize people. So he's in this huge lake, and he's driving through one of the bayous heading to the next lake, right? And there's this wood line off to his right. To the left, there's just marsh. And above the wood line is kind of a little levee, which all these encounters in southeast Louisiana tend to happen on these levees because that's just the natural thoroughfare for game and everything to get through these marshlands, right? So he's driving along. Actually, he's not driving. He's trolling along because he's fishing for redfish off the bank. And his dog, the whole time they've been in the boat, his dog has been taking a nap. His dog, Buck, starts to get the wind of something, goes to the front of the boat, and Buck starts barking. And I had an opportunity to see Buck. Buck is a very big German Shepherd and beautiful dog, you know, I mean, a lovely dog, well-mannered dog and everything. And Buck starts barking at the wood line, and he's like, you know, Buck, what's going on with you? The dog continues to bark, and it gets more and more vicious. And as they get further down into the wooded, I mean, between the woods and the marsh on the other side, he sees this huge shadow moving behind the trees. He can't quite make it out, but it's a big black shadow. Then he says, and this is the exact words to me, he said, man, I saw the biggest dog I've ever seen in my life. And he said it was on 4 legs, and it was moving from tree to tree, and it was kind of tracking us from tree to tree. And he said at this point in time, Buck is barking so viciously and ferociously that he thinks he's going to jump out of the boat. Then the dog man sticks his head out from the brush and the bushes, and just the head. And he's like, man, when I saw that, he was like, it was a wolf. It wasn't a dog. He was like, it's the biggest wolf I've ever seen. He's like, the head was 5 times bigger than Buck's head. He said he kind of froze for a second. His dog never backed down, and it never paid attention to him. It only paid attention to Buck trying to intimidate Buck. And then it growled, and his dog, Buck, went silent for a second. And his exact words is the funny thing. He was like, I can see Buck's mind thinking, okay, what am I supposed to do? Because this thing just growled at me. And then his dog started barking again, even louder and more ferociously. And it was trying to intimidate his dog. At this point in time, he's freaking out because he's like, man, this is a big wolf. It didn't stand up on 2 legs. It was still on all 4s. And he hits the throttle on the boat, takes off, and goes further down. The next section where he can turn to kind of loop back around, because he wasn't going back that way, it's about a quarter mile away. And he loops into this little area where there's these houses. And there's people who actually live, their houses on stilts. They live on their houses on the water. And he sees the guys outside. He, throttles down the boat, pulls over and starts asking the guy these questions. Hey, man, have you ever seen a big wolf out here? And the first guy says, nah, man, I never seen anything like that. He goes to the next house. The guy's sitting on his porch fishing. And he asks, have you ever seen a wolf? And he's like, yeah, I've seen him plenty of times. Just leave him alone. He'll leave you alone. So it turns out that Dog Man, not only is he the crypto terrorist, he's the equivalent of Al Qaeda in the cryptozoology world, in my opinion, or ISIS. This thing is everywhere, and just like the one that I can't talk about, that's in Ohio, and they're having activity in Ohio from Dog Man. So it really is, and I've never seen anything like this, and I never heard of anything where an animal is intentionally terrorizing people, and it just shows that it goes to tell you how intelligent this creature is and how intelligent this crypto creature is, because it has the ability to reason and try and scare you, A cougar doesn't scare you. It sneaks up on you to eat you, A bear just runs up on you and destroys you, Lions roar. Yeah, that's because they want to let you know, but essentially after they roar at you, they're coming to eat you. They don't animals don't typically have that way of thinking the way they terrorize a person. And that's the scariest thing about Dog Man.
Tell us about your own encounter. Tell us what happened. For the audience, tell us what you were doing and just walk them right into what happened.
Okay, so, and I'll be as quick as this is possible to bring you guys up to speed on my encounter. The first encounter that I heard about Dog Man was the one that happened at Bayou Sauvage. I went out and interviewed that gentleman, and then it led to a secondary encounter. And I ended up speaking with a friend of mine that works for a power company named David. And David hooked me up with Skip. Skip is the lineman that had his encounter outside of Taylor, Mississippi. And Skip happened to know Dave, and I was like, okay, Dave, I really want to talk to this guy. So I interviewed Skip. He gives me an open invitation to come out to Oxford, Mississippi. And like a fool, I take the invitation. And in retrospect, it was foolish for me to do that or in hindsight, it was foolish for me to do that because it led to me having my own encounter. So he takes me on a tour of the area. And when I say a tour, I mean, we're slowly driving around. He's pointing out places where there's currently activity. He drove me by a few farms where people are being attacked now and their livestock are being killed, and people who are going out of business because, they sell eggs and things of that nature, and they just can't they can't survive because of the things that are going on. Towards the end of the day, he takes me to where his encounter was, right? And we're just outside of his truck talking about his encounter because I wanted to put him back in that situation and get a feel for what really happened to him. Because if you take a person back to the space of their encounter, they're going to relive it. And that's what was going on. He was reliving it, talking to me about it. And as the sun starts setting behind the trees, he starts to get skittish and nervous. He's like, hey, man, we really need to go. And at this point in time, I'm still kind of skeptical of all this, but I'm respectful. And in every conversation, I try and treat it from a skeptic's mentality, every conversation I have, but I'm always respectful of the person. And if whether I believe them or not, they'll never know that. But at the end of the day, I'm always respect people's encounters because I've had so many weird things happen to me in my life and just crazy things. And so as we're standing there talking, we start hearing this rumbling sound coming through the woods. And it's a low rumble at first, and it gets louder and louder, and then it's tree limbs breaking, trees falling over. And I describe it as the sound of NFL linemen running through the woods, except for they're breaking everything in their way. It's like it was terrible. When I say it was a terrible sound, it really was the most terrible sound that I've ever heard because something's coming for you. And he goes back to the truck. I mean, he literally starts walking quickly back to the truck, and he positions himself with one leg in the truck, one leg outside the truck. And I'm lollygagging, I'm just like, oh, okay. And again, I'm hearing these noises, but my mind hasn't made the connection that it hasn't become real to me. It's one of those things where it takes, I don't know how to explain it, but it takes a while for you to really come to the reality that this is something that's truly dangerous. And then when it hit me that it was truly dangerous, it was too late. So I'm now walking towards the truck. I position myself on the passenger side with the door kind of halfway open, resting on my butt to where I could climb in, but I didn't climb in. And he's freaking out. He's like, they're coming, man, they're coming, I'm telling you. And he's calling the distances, and he's like, man, that's about 150 yards away, man, get in the truck. And then he pulls off. And when I say I'm talking about pull off, I mean like he floors it, gone. The door hits me in the butt. It swings back open. I look over, and the truck is going down the road. The door is swinging kind of back and forth open, trying to close itself. And I'm standing there, and I'm by myself, and it's pretty much dark. And so those sounds come to a screeching halt, and I've never known, I've owned dogs before. Normally if a dog runs and it stops running, it has to slide a little bit, to skid a bit. I mean, it's a complete stop, boom, and everything is silent, deadly silent, no noises, no nothing. And now I'm standing there, literally, if I had to put a distance, I would say 30 yards from the actual wood line on the other side of the road. And I'm freaking out because I'm left by myself. I mean, and all kind of thoughts run through your head when you're in that kind of situation. And the most prevailing thought was, man, you are such an idiot because you came out here looking for something and you weren't prepared, and you never really took it serious enough to prepare yourself for something happening. If I would have took it serious, then maybe I would have got a shotgun or something from someone. Or maybe I would have brought one of my other weapons that I have from the house, but I didn't take it serious enough. And that really bothers me to this day, although I don't think there was anything that I could do. So I'm standing there and freaking out, sweating, my heart racing. I'm feeling lightheaded and dizzy. And like I tell my subscribers all the time, ever since this incident, I've been working out every day because I'll never be caught in a situation like that where I knew I couldn't run from it. I mean, I'm just not in the shape to outrun anything. I can't outrun my 12-year-old son. So I'm not in shape to outrun something like that. So I just stand there, and the only thing I could think of doing was raising my fist like I was going to fight. That's the only thing I could do. So I end up raising my fist, and as I'm raising my fist to defend myself in whatever way possible, that is when I hear Skip's truck screeching to a halt. And I could hear him turning around because he's revving the engine. He had to burn $30 worth of gas the way he did this. because you can hear his engine revving like, and you can hear him coming back my way. And as he's coming back my way around this little slight turn, it lights up the area, including me, and it starts to light up that wood line. And I see a 6 to 7 foot tall figure move from left to right, from one tree to the next, right? And as I see that, my eyes get huge. And I'm like, oh, really? Something's really there. But he slams on his brakes, literally slides the car next to me where he's in the driver's window screaming at me, and I'm looking almost face to face with him. He's like, get in the truck, get in the truck, get in the truck. And so I try to hop in the bed of the truck because I'm not going around to the passenger side of the truck because that's going to put me closer to whatever this is. And in the original story, I kind of tell it like I was able to jump in the truck and pull off like I'm one of the Expendables. But no, what really happened is I tried to throw my leg up in the truck and I couldn't get in. And I tried again and I couldn't get in. So then I went to the back tire, jumped up on the tire and jumped in the bed of the truck, and I laid down flat and he pulled off. And then we got further up and further away. He pulled over. I hopped in the truck with him in the passenger side, and we went at it back and forth, cursing and screaming. And initially, I was very, very upset with him. When I say upset, I mean I could have hurt him. But when I looked in his eyes and saw the terror and fear in his eyes, he said, "Man, I would have never left you. I thought you were in the truck." You know, it made me feel a lot better. And since then, Skip and I have become very, very good friends. I mean, I talk to Skip 2 times a week. Now, Skip will not go in that area anymore. He's petitioned to have his territory changed to where he doesn't work in that area anymore. So and that's how serious it is for him. And then just the effects that it's had on me, you know, last night I tried to go to sleep. It took me 2 hours to go to sleep because I've never had anxiety over anything. We're talking about somebody who survived Hurricane Katrina. We're talking about somebody who survived some very, very interesting times in his life where I dealt with some sketchy people and I never had anxiety. But now I have anxiety attacks at night. And I thought I was having a heart attack last night until I Googled everything and looked it up. And it was anxiety. It's this sinking feeling in your chest, like in this quick shortness of breath. And I know nothing's wrong with my heart because I had my heart checked. I work out. I can get on the elliptical machine and do 5 miles in no time. I lift weights. Well, that's wrong with my heart, but I have this anxiety that I've never had, and it all stems from that encounter. That's why I say that this creature is a terrorist. I mean, it terrorizes you, and it instills some form of fear in you that just is not normal. And just for those people who think that you want to have an encounter with this creature, don't do what I did. You know, don't be an idiot and go out looking for something that you're not prepared to deal with that. And that's my advice to people, because when I tell you it took me 2 hours, it took me 2 hours. And eventually I prayed and said, hey, God, you know what? If I'm going to die in my sleep tonight, forgive me for my sins. I need to rest. I'm going to bed. And I was able to close my eyes and go to sleep. And I fell asleep. But it's just insane how it affects you physically. And everyone that I've spoken to that has had an encounter with these creatures, it affects them physically for months and years, how their bodies tend to change. And I don't know. I don't understand what that is. That's one of the things that I'm going to start researching is what this type of fear does to you, because it has to be doing something to your body. And I'm not a doctor, so I don't know what chemicals or hormones are released when you're afraid, but it must be such a massive release of it into your bloodstream that it must take a long time for it to filter out.
I agree with you. It's something to where I always tell people first, be careful what you wish for. A lot of people want Bigfoot encounters. They want dogman encounters. And I always tell people, be careful what you wish for, because it might just happen. But, you know, what you experienced with the anxiety and, having trouble sleeping at night, a lot of people have Bigfoot encounters and even dogman encounters. They kind of go through that. They have a hard time sleeping for a long time. They have a hard time kind of dealing with it. You know, I've talked to a lot of people off the air that don't want to come on the show. And it's interesting. You'll find a lot of alcoholics, and it's usually guys that haven't talked about it for like 30 years. And that's the one thing that they're open about. I had just talked to a guy yesterday who's a hunter who experienced, this hog being ripped apart and a Sasquatch eating it right in front of him. When I say right in front of him, he's probably, 50 to 100 yards away. Sasquatch never saw him. But he said, hey, man, I saw it about 25 years ago and didn't have anyone to tell, who's going to believe you when you say something like that. And I started drinking. So there is an actual effect it has on people. It's kind of the shock, I think, of seeing something that isn't supposed to exist, seeing something that isn't supposed to be real. What was going on with Skip? What happened with Skip's encounter?
Well, Skip's job was to work and repair distribution lines. And so there was a storm in the area, and Skip went out, and he was repairing the distribution lines. And so he's up in a bucket truck, and Skip ends up getting surrounded by these creatures to the point to where, those bucket trucks go about 20 to 22. I think the max he put them was 25 feet. Now, you have to forgive me, but he's elevated as far up as he can get in the bucket truck. And he's literally hiding in a truck. And this is another thing. And when he originally told me this, I was like, oh, man, he's playing with me. This can't be real. But after my experience, now it's all tying together. He's in the truck, and he says, it sounds like someone is throwing gravel and a whole bunch of rocks at the bottom and the side of the bucket, which is this kind of metal bucket that they're in. And initially I said, well, why would Dogman do that? But after having so many conversations with people about how they actually terrorize you, he was in a confined space where he could be terrorized, and they terrorized this man. And now in the story, I condense everything down to where it's like, it's easily swallowed and palatable for people, but people have to realize that man was in that bucket for over an hour with these things walking around him in the dark, with these things throwing stuff, and not just one or two rocks. I'm talking about large amounts of rocks and gravel at him at the bucket truck, and to the point to where he finally realized that the only way he was going to get down was to distract them. And he shot a flare that they kept in their little emergency kits. It's like a flare gun is what he described it as. He shot that in the air towards the woods, and he physically saw four of them run off into the woods chasing after the flare. And then I guess I would call this the alpha male one, stood in the roadway and looked at him. It kind of smirked at him, and he said it was kind of a evilish smirk or smile, kind of tilted his head, and it looked kind of angry at him because she had distracted, I guess, whatever the other ones were, and then it took off in the direction of the rest of them. And that's how he came down out of the bucket and got the hell out of there. Now, one of the things that I didn't say is he didn't even bother to let the bucket down. This guy's driving down the street with the bucket up until he got far enough away to where because he had to control it from the outside. So he had to drive further down the roadway to where he felt safe and then let the bucket down. And when he got back to safety, he called his boss and told his boss that he couldn't finish the job, but it needed to be done. And so he asked for help. And that's how he ended up talking to Edward, which Ed's name is not the real name, but ended up talking to Edward. And him and Ed had to go back to the area and finish the last 3 poles that needed to be taken care of. And they came back, and they were still in the area. And Ed just ignored them and did his job, but he was still being terrorized. And that is how a lot of people don't know how I ended up talking to Ed and getting his stories. That is how I ended up getting all of Ed's information and all his stories. And right after that, Ed retired, and that was that. So, there's a lot of activity in that area.
Did the witness ever describe to you what they saw?
Yeah, he did. He described, Skip described initially when he was in the truck, he was looking down to the next power pole, and he said it looked like a tall guy in black fur that was rubbing his back on one of the power lines because the actual wires were vibrating and moving. And so that was the first thing that really caught his attention. And he said the sounds were the other things that caught his attention. Now, when he shot the flare in the air, he described it to a T. I mean, it's been consistent with every other description I've had, except for one guy who pretty much described a Bigfoot with a head of a wolf. But it was a black dog, long pointed ears, long snout. And the thing that stood out to him the most was the nose. because as it approached towards the truck, he could see how big the nose of this dog was, and it walked on two legs, and it held its, and he called it claws, but everything was down towards his side. He described the shoulders being massive, like a bodybuilder, and it tapering down to a slim waist, and he also described it having a long tail. So Skip's descriptions were very, very good. And as time has progressed, I've grown to have a greater appreciation for people's description of these animals because, again, at first I did not. I was a skeptic. So now I pay a lot more attention to the descriptions. And the same description from the guy who has the dog Buck, he described the exact similar animal, the same color, black, the same, except for this one had its snout. I guess you know how the dog has the nostrils. The snout on the one that was in the counter with the dog Buck had a slit in it, like it was kind of cut open or it had been cut open in the past. So it's just a frightening image, and it's a frightening thing to even think about. Now, the other ones that ran off, what he described those as were different colors. Two are dark black color, and the other two are like a brownish, blackish color. So, and also at the same time, he did say, hey, man, you know, only light I had was a light from the bucket on my truck and also the light from the flare when it went in the air. And he was like, but I saw black and brown, two black, two brown going off in that direction. So he was surrounded by 5 of these creatures. And I could never imagine being in an isolated situation like that where I'm up in the air and I can't come down and I'm surrounded by 5 of these creatures.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, God, that would be terrifying. It's interesting. With these Dogman encounters, do you get reports of the tail? Yeah,
I do. I do get reports of tail. Sometimes I get reports of no tail. Sometimes I get reports of tail. But I get more reports of tails than not having tails. And then I get reports of people who've seen them. And I guess it's a more younger version of it. And a lot of those reports I really don't get into because I don't have permission to talk about them. But I've got reports of younger versions of them that are, I guess you would say, adolescent, I don't know, that have way shorter tails, but they actually walk on their hind legs. So it runs the gambit. I mean, gray ones, black ones that are jet black to the point to where it's almost like the sun is absorbed into their fur. Brownish red ones. It runs the gambit. It's actually very scary to believe that, because that shows you that there's some kind of diversity in the breeding of these creatures, a serious diversity in the breeding in these creatures. And if there's a diversity in the breeding, then there's a diversity in probably the way these things think and the way some are more aggressive than others. And it's so new to me that it's like peeling the layers of an onion back, and you're just trying to figure out, man, what's really going on with these creatures.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting. I want to come back to one thing that you just said about the sunlight kind of being absorbed by them. But before I do, I talked to a guy, probably 3 weeks ago, and he was talking about this white polar bear he saw. And this was in Virginia, I believe. And he was saying he saw a white polar bear. And I said, you saw a white polar bear? And he goes, yeah, as I was driving up, it was crossing over the road and going down in this canyon. And as I drove up on it, I realized it wasn't a polar bear. It was a large, what appeared to be like wolf-like creature with a long tail. He goes, but imagine the size of a polar bear and then basically give it a wolf's body, and that's what I saw. He goes, and it had this long tail, and he goes, it was completely white. The creature was completely white, and he didn't know what it was. He never used the term Bigfoot or Dogman. He's like, I thought it was a polar bear until I rolled up on it and realized it wasn't. So they are seeing a lot. They are seeing a lot more than I think most people realize. What are you finding? You'd made one comment there that caught my attention about the sun absorbing into the color of the fur. What did you mean by that?
Well, in the original encounter that I covered, and this was the Bayou Sauvage encounter. And again, I was an idiot. I went to Bayou Sauvage, and there's footage of Bayou Sauvage because I believed him, but I didn't believe him, again, being skeptic. But in hindsight, I will never do that again. But the original story was about this gentleman who was an Army Ranger, And people who've heard it know the background, but just quickly, I'm at a cigar shop here in New Orleans talking to one of my very close friends, and he's giving me stories about his days with DEA and FBI. And sitting across from us is this gentleman that pretty much looks like one of the Expendables, like Sylvester Stallone or one of those other people. And he's smoking a cigar, and he's got a glass of, I think it was scotch or bourbon, one of the two. And he's looking at us, and he says, I have a story I want to share, but you won't believe it. But I'm a very talkative person, and it's easy to talk to people. So I said, sure, I'll talk to you. I give him a free cigar. We start talking. He starts telling me his story about being out at Bayou Sauvage Wildlife Refuge, fishing in Lake Pontchartrain, and being trapped with one of these dogmen on one side of a moving train and him on the other. The thing that stuck out the most to me in his encounter was, number one, that as the train was coming, he went up the levee. And for those people who don't know about the levees in Louisiana, that is our flood protection and storm surge protection. And our whole city is surrounded by that, because if not, then, we die and we drown pretty much at any point in time, right? So he ascends this levee and is getting ready to start smoking and let the train pass. And he looks out into the bayou and he sees this, what he thought was the head of a bear swimming in the bayou. And he's like looking at this thing swimming through the water. It catches him and sees him looking at him. It changes direction and comes for him and comes out of the water and shows itself to him. As he sees this thing come out of the water, he literally races back down and tries to put the train between it and him. And essentially he's running alongside the train, trying to get away. The train conductor actually saw it, and I've been trying to find out who this train conductor could have been, but there's no way of knowing. Finally, when the train passes, he ascends the levee again with his weapon in hand, ready to shoot this thing and get away. And it's a little bit further away from him than it was prior to when he first saw it. But one of the things that he described was the fur was so black and so dark that it looked like the sun, when the sun hit it, it was a black void, like it some kind of way it was sucking in the light from the sun. There's a reflection to everything. If there's a black car out, there's a reflection. If you have a black shirt on, the sun tends to just reflect off it just a little bit. Not a lot, but just enough. But he was like, man, there was nothing. It was like I knew it was an animal. I knew it was a creature, but it was like the sun light was absorbed into it. And I thought that was real strange when he first said it. But I've also talked to other people who had encounters with the dark jet black dogmen, and they say the same thing. It's like, man, it's like the sun, when the sun hits it, it's this weird look to it, like it's just absorbing the light from the sun, and it's like it doesn't reflect anything. And so that's about all I can tell you on it. Why that happens, I don't know. Maybe it's just the color is that black and that dark, that's what it is. But I couldn't tell you why. But that is how he described his encounter to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know I've talked to a few witnesses that have had Sasquatch encounters, and they've described the same thing to me. And then I had a scientist email me one time, and he said it's a pigment in the skin. It has to do with the pigment in the fur and in the skin, and it brings that, it kind of sucks in the light. And he kind of gave me some examples of Hollywood, how they have different lightings and certain colors they avoid because they have that same thing that happens on film. But it has to do with the pigment of the skin and the pigment of the fur. And whether that's true or not, sounds like a great explanation to me. But I've talked to other witnesses with Sasquatch that have described that same type of thing. Have you ever talked to anyone that's gotten physically attacked by a dogman?
Yeah, I have spoken to people who've been physically attacked, but I don't have permission to get into those encounters. I've had some where people were abducted, people were attacked, but I just don't have the permission to get into those. The one that kind of really gets into the most of that gives you a run of the gambit of the encounters and what happens with dogmen really is the Siege of Lockett Ranch, because it talks about everything, and it's kind of like it sums up all the interactions with dogmen in one story. And a lot of people listen to it, but for people who haven't, the gentleman Ed, this is his account from when he was 12, 13 years old in 1948 and the things that were going on with his family at their property. And in that story, it proves that these creatures are, number one, very territorial. in that once their territory is invaded or if you trespass on their territory, they do everything to run you out of there, right? And then if you end up attacking, and these kind of like lessons learned from that story, and this is, I guess, the best way to approach it. And if you harm or injure these creatures in any way, then they are coming for you, and they come and they will come and kill you. So it's one of those things where the Siege at Lockett Ranch really, really exposes a lot of the myths about dogman, because initially there was this thought process that these creatures didn't attack and kill people, right? I heard that perpetuated over and over and over again, that, you'll have a run-in with these creatures and they won't do you anything. They'll turn away at the last moment and they won't hurt you. Well, no, I completely disagree with that. I mean, there's a number of accounts of canine attacks that are unknown canine attacks all over the United States. It's just not true at the end of the day. In that story, there were several men, I want to say 7 or 8 men who came up missing and were killed by dogmen. The first one was one of the loggers that was out logging on the land, and he was with a friend of his, and he was only 20 yards away, or 20 yards away from this guy. And the guy turned his back and was having a conversation. When he turns around, the guy's gone. Later on, they only find his bloody shirt with a tear in it. So these creatures are not only apex predators and smart and cunning, but they're deadly at the same time. So if anyone wants to hear about really some of the real true things that have happened with dogman, that story, and it's a 3-part story, I really took a lot of time and energy to make sure that I touched on everything I could that I was told that would kind of dispel some of the myths about dogmen. And another example is about the level of intelligence. Things like them turning doorknobs at the back of the house while trying to break in the front of the house, distraction techniques that they use, them literally digging under the house. Like, these things are things that, again, only a predator that has the ability to reason will do it. Them on top of people's roofs. It's just things that a predator that has the extreme ability to reason and think will do. So, again, I cannot warn people more than I've already have, but I will say I don't advise anybody to go out looking for these creatures, because you're going to bite off way more than you can chew. You really, really will.
Yeah, and I highly recommend everyone, if you go to YouTube and type in Dark Waters, and look for the Dogman, the Siege of Lockett Ranch. It's a great story, and you did a great job on it, DW. You really did. I highly recommend, and I'll include a link under this. If you go to SasquatchChronicles.com, I'll include a link to Dark Waters channel. I did one yesterday. If you get a chance, go subscribe to him. What do you think Dogman is?
That's a great question, and that kind of circles back to what the original story I told you about my childhood and the preacher, and I've been forced to try and go from a historical researching background and try and find information about them. Initially, I thought that they were some form of Nephilim or some form of animal that had been created from falling angels. That's what I initially thought. Then my thought process moved to, okay, well, maybe this, we got all these genetically modified things going on. Maybe there's some kind of genetically modified creature. But as I started reading historical accounts of these creatures being around 4,000, 5,000 years ago, I said, okay, well, I mean, the American government wasn't around 5,000 years ago. America wasn't around, so it can't be that. And so I just narrowed it down to my thought process being either these creatures truly are some form of a Nephilim, which would be the seeds of fallen angels, or something that was created from that point in time, or these creatures are something that have been here forever and they've survived the changes that have been that this earth is going through, and the planet goes through rapid changes. We're going through changes now with all these earthquakes. So at the end of the day, do I know for sure? No. Those are my two theories at this moment. The more I research, those theories will probably evolve and change, because I really am researching this more and more. I don't think anyone is an expert on this, because I don't think there's a way to be an expert on these creatures because it's not safe for you to physically go in their presence, you know? Like, I think there could be a person who's an expert on Bigfoot because, you know, if there's certain rules that I'm hearing that and understanding that as long as you don't cross certain boundaries with Bigfoot, you may be safe, although they will probably eat you as well. And if you probably get a bad Bigfoot, then they'll definitely eat you. But I don't see any way anyone can truly accurately research these creatures. Now, what I will say is I'm aware that our government knows about these creatures. I'm very aware that they know about them, and that's something I can't talk about. But I know for a fact that they are aware that these creatures exist. They are aware of where they are. Why they haven't done anything about it, I don't know. I can't answer that question, but I know they are aware of it. And those are some of the conversations that I have that I can't disclose because it's not safe for me or the other person, but they know that these creatures exist and they know that they're out there. I wish I could talk to someone who would really give me the lowdown on what they really are. But then again, be careful what you ask for because when you get it, there's always consequences to everything. So I don't know, man. I don't know, just to be honest with you.
It's interesting. It kind of falls into, you know, it's funny when I first started talking to people, they would describe the Dogman to me. And, you know, there's a Sasquatch out there that has a protruding snout. I've talked to many witnesses that have seen it. It has a protruding snout. And that's what I always assumed what the Dogman was. I thought people were misidentifying what they were seeing. I thought people were, you know, not understanding what they were seeing. And so they were calling it a Dogman. And as I started talking to more and more witnesses about the Dogman, the more and more I started realizing you're talking apples and oranges compared to Bigfoot. This is something completely separate. But what I found is people are very consistent on what the description is, on what they're seeing. I even talked to a guy one time that was attacked by one. I can't give too many details about it because of the whole situation, but he had been picked up and thrown by one. And what he told me was, he said, Wes, you're wrong about the Dogman. It is real. Here's what I saw. And he starts describing to me, it had a head of a German Shepherd, it had little beady eyes, it just looked evil. And this thing had actually picked him up and thrown him. And he still has physical marks from this attack. But he ended up shooting it. He thought he was aiming for the head. And when he shot it, he thinks he blew the middle finger off because it was reaching down for him after it had thrown him. And there was other witnesses that had seen this attack. But it's a very interesting story. And from that point is when I really started thinking, you know what, maybe there's something to this Dogman. Maybe there's something, because I've known this guy forever. And he starts telling me the story about being attacked. When I talk to witnesses sometimes, and you hear the story, you walk through the encounter with them, you kind of get a sense of why Sasquatch showed up, whether it's territory, they just wanted the person to leave, they wanted the food, or that person was in danger of being killed. You can kind of put two and two together on what's going on. With the Dogman, what are you finding why there's such aggression from them?
Well, here's what I found. There's two scenarios in which people end up encountering these creatures. The first scenario is they're out in the woods, they're hunting, and they stumble upon what's considered to be their territory. And in that case, as long as that person exits the territory and does not show any active aggressions, doesn't shoot them, then they're fine. Now, in one of the stories that's coming out real soon, I'm working on it now, and I can talk about this one. A father and a son are in a hunting blind, and the son he's 13 years old, and he's taking his son hunting for the first time. He gives his son the rifle. His son sets it up, gets ready to shoot. He digs down into one of his backpacks to get some beef jerky and water. His son starts firing. And he's like, son, what are you shooting at? When he looks up, there is a deer on one end of the clearing and a big wolf-like creature running behind the deer. The son has tried to shoot the deer and ended up hitting the Dogman, right? Now, the father and the son exit, because the father's like, this is not normal. They exit the tree stand, or the blind is what he called it, head back to their car, and then a day later, that creature is in their backyard, right? And it terrorizes them for 3 days. This happened in southeast Louisiana. So in this case, they were in the Dogman's hunting grounds. they made the mistake of shooting it, and it followed them home, right? And it terrorized them. Now, it could have easily broken into their house, and he described how easily it could have came through their sliding glass black door, but it didn't. And he also talks about how it killed his neighbor's dog. Now, that's one scenario, right? So you're in its territory, and you just so happen to have the bad luck of stumbling upon its territory, and then you make an even worse mistake by assaulting it in some way, shape, or form, and it comes back and it sends you a message. The other scenario in which, and that's when aggression is shown. The other scenarios that I've encountered with people is that they are out and about minding their own business, and they're on like a roadway, or they're somewhere that's heavily populated, and they run across, on the outskirts of a heavily populated area, and they run across one of these creatures, and typically that creature is trying to intimidate them and get them to leave out of its presence, right? Now, those are the two scenarios that I have encountered when I talk to people. And again, when people talk about Dogman coming to their homes, it's typically because their homes is in an area that's a part of its territory where it roams, whether it's just migratory area where it's going hunting, or maybe where it's mating. You see that aggression, and then you see another form of, and the aggression turns to a form of terrorism. In my opinion, and from what I've seen, it turns into a form of terrorism once you've done something to assault these creatures. So now it's kind of like it's amping it up a level. And then from there, after it goes through terrorizing you, if you don't get the message, then it goes to the point to where it's assaulting, trying to break in houses and kill people. And then on the other side, there's people who just have the unfortunate encounter of stumbling upon these things where they're migrating from one point to another point, and it's not in their territory, and it wants you to leave their presence. Now, I'm a firm believer that, and the more I study this, I'm a firm believer that when we talk about people like the missing 411 with David Pilates and things that are going on, I'm a firm believer that both Bigfoot and Dogman are culprits of this, of people coming up missing. And the more I've thought about it, and the more I put energy into it, how do you disclose to people, right, that there's two different apex predators that are on federal lands or federal parks and recreation lands? How do you expose that to people, and how do you tell them that, right? It's nearly impossible, right? First of all, because most people are not going to believe it, and they're still going to go out and do what they're going to do. And then secondly, I mean, how do you get the general public to believe or understand that something like this exists? The reason why I'm pretty sure that they don't keep track of the names of these people and how many people gone missing, because the minute that you have tracks of it, you have to be responsible for explaining what happens to these people. So hypothetically, there's a body that you do find that's torn into pieces, right? And it's not a dog, it's not a wolf, it's something worse. You have to be responsible for that information. And the only way to not be responsible for information is to pretend that it doesn't exist. So I'm a firm believer that these creatures are actually the culprits in these situations. And I think it's dangerous. And you won't find me in any woods or parklands or camping or anything like that. I'm not doing it. I'll stick to the city. I'll deal with the criminals trying to break in your car and steal your cell phone before I go out in the woods, man.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that Dogman and Sasquatch are responsible for a lot of the missing people. And I've said that before on the show in the past. I really think that these things do snag people. One of the things I wanted to ask you, and you don't have to go into the story, but earlier you had mentioned you had actually spoken to someone who had been taken by a Dogman. Were they able to escape, or was that...
No, I didn't. No, I probably misspoke. I wasn't saying that I spoke to someone who had been taken. I spoke to some people who are in law enforcement who informed me about a case where two people were taken by Dogmen, and they have no doubts about it. They found the actual hair in the people's house. They found footprints inside the house. So I didn't talk to the person who himself was taken, because those two people are missing. But I have talked to people in law enforcement who explained to me that they've had missing persons cases where people have been abducted out of their homes. So no, I must have misspoke when I said that. That was not what I was trying to get across.
No, that's okay. And it's interesting too. You talk about the door handle moving with these Dogman encounters, and you hear that a lot with Sasquatch encounters. I've talked to people in the past. There's the famous track that was taken by a police officer. They found dermal ridges in it, but originally why he cast that track, what led up to him casting that track, is constantly being called out to these old people's homes. They kept going on and on and on about these apes harassing them night after night after night. And he thought it was a bogus call until about the fifth or sixth time out there. Then he realized, there's something to this. These people aren't lying. He got that famous track. When you when you're talking to people about these dogmen, do you find that the dogmen run alone, or are they running in groups? Kind of like what the Sasquatch, when I talk to witnesses, they always say they saw one, but they always felt like there was two or three more nearby. Are you finding that with these dogman encounter cases, or is it just a one solo creature they're running into?
The overwhelming consensus from people that I've spoken to is that not only is it more than one, it's between 4 and 5 that that once they encounter one, you see one, but there are others that are there that you can feel and you can sense, and that you hear them moving around you. And again, these creatures, this is a form of crypto-terrorism, because these creatures can be as silent as they want to be, but they let people know that they're there. So, no, they're running, especially the canine types, which is a lot of the reports I'm getting. These are the ones that have the long tails and actually look like wolves or German shepherds. And it's interesting because you describe them as looking like a German shepherd, and then there's other descriptions of them looking like a black timber wolf. So there's so many different variations, and the black timber wolves are the ones that I'm getting from here in Louisiana. There's a lot of variations, but one thing that's been consistent is it's more than one. Now, in that situation with Buck, the dog on the boat, which will be coming out soon, that was only one. Now, why it was only one, I don't know. But the other encounters where I'm talking to people, I don't know, it's more than one. Especially some of the ones where I've talked to hunters that have been out in the woods, and the dog man has showed himself to them, revealed himself. Like he would have never known that the creature was there, but he decided to reveal itself to him. Not only did he see that one, but he felt the presence of the other ones, and he heard the footsteps, or the footfalls, I guess is the right word to describe it, behind him, to the left and to the right of him. And he was able to get out of that situation and back out of there. So it's really, to me, it's really confusing, because these things are unpredictable, because you would think that guy would have been lunch. It's 4 or 5 of them. It's him. We should never heard from him again, right? But he got away. But in one case, they followed a family home, a father and son home. So it's really completely unpredictable, and I attribute that unpredictability to, again, the level of intelligence of the creatures, because if they were simply predators, they would have nothing but an instinct or an urge to pounce on you and eat you, right? And they wouldn't be able to resist that urge. I'm going to eat you, your lunch, your dinner for the night, and that's done. So I attribute that inconsistency to their intelligence level, because it's clearly they're making some decision to let you go, or to scare you, or to terrorize you, or to kill you. So I just think, again, that we're dealing with a highly intelligent creature that runs in packs, and that's extremely dangerous, extremely deadly.
Yeah, they seem very unnatural. They seem like a very unnatural creature, don't you think?
And unnatural, what sense do you mean unnatural? You mean like supernatural, or you mean unnatural as in unnatural behavior?
Well, I mean, it seems like every dogman witness I've spoken with, the one word that comes up all the time is evil. They said it was evil. Or they felt, like you said, they felt a presence of another one nearby. And they just an upright standing canine seems unnatural. Just seems very unnatural to me.
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that, in the essence that I think a upright walking canine is just completely unnatural. But also, I put so much thought into this because I talked to so many people about it. I think a lot of it is perception as well. So how do we perceive something that, and how do we, it's perception, and then there's the limitation to our verbal ability to describe some things, right? Because the average person doesn't know this exists, so the concept of it is alien to them. This description of it is alien to them. And in their minds, it's alien. It's something that doesn't exist. So how do you describe seeing a 10-foot walking wolf? You know, how do you describe it? I mean, what words do you use? And I think that the consensus has been that it's evil. I'm not saying that these creatures aren't evil because, hey, I know the feelings that I felt was the feeling of dread. I felt like I was going to die. I felt like something was going to jump out of the air and eat me. So I'm not saying that they aren't evil. I'm just saying that the way we describe them, I think, is heavily based on, I think there's limitations as to how we can describe this entity of these creatures. And it's just because in our psyche, it doesn't exist in our psyche. It's something that's new to us. Now, could it be attributed to being described as being evil, be attributed to the simple fact that they're werewolf movies and we see them in the movies, the werewolves are evil? I don't know. I can speak from my personal experience and say that in my personal experience, I didn't feel evil, but I felt like I wasn't going to survive. I knew I was close to dying. You know, that was a definite feeling that I had. So, and I've heard people describe them as being evil and sinister. And the thing that sticks out the most is in these encounters where people talk about the animal tilting his head to the left or to the right and smirking or kind of smiling at them or snarling at them. And that, again, that's why I call Dogman the crypto terrorist, because those type of things are it's just insane that a creature would do that to you. So I can definitely see someone calling it evil. I just call into question, you know, the use of language with it, because I just think that at the end of the day, what else do you call something like that? You know, how else do you describe it? How else does your mind process that type of encounter other than, man, this has to be evil? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. You know, I never talked to a hunter that said he saw a cougar and thought it was evil. I've never spoken with a hunter who said he saw a bear and he thought it was evil. But the strange thing about the Dogman is everyone I've ever spoken with, that word seems to come up. It seems to be in the vocabulary when they're describing it. Can you tell us about the father and son that were followed home?
Yeah, well, so essentially, I think I touched on it earlier. The father and the son are out hunting. The son ends up trying to shoot a deer, ends up hitting the Dogman that's pursuing the deer. And the father, being smart and says this is not normal, quickly gets his son into the truck. And they get home that night. The son comes jumping in, like literally, and anybody who's had kids, you know how your child acts when they're afraid. He's laying in a bed, and he's awakened by his son flying through the air, landing on top of him and his wife in the bed, screaming, "There's a monster outside, there's a monster outside." And initially, he wasn't going to take it serious. But then he thought about what he had seen earlier that day, and when he went to his son's bedroom to look out the window, he saw a huge shadow move towards the back of the house. And when he went to the back of the property, not to the back of the property, went to the back of the house where his large sliding glass door is. And you know how apartments have those sliding glass doors, or, you know, old school houses have the sliding glass doors?
Yeah.
He goes to the sliding glass door, and this Dogman walks out from the side of his house into his yard and looks at him. He's like, man, this is crazy. And he's trying to figure out what to do. He goes to get his shotgun. When he comes back, it's not there. By this time, his wife is awakened, and she's like trying to figure out what's going on. And he goes back to the window. The glass door, and is looking out, and his wife starts talking to him. And as he turns around, he's talking to his wife and saying, you know, "Hey, baby, it's okay. Don't worry about it. I saw something," trying to calm her down and get her to go back in her room. She sees it behind him, and he describes his wife's face as going completely and totally pale, her eyes being so big that he had never seen anyone's eyes get that big, and she screamed and ran back to the bedroom. He turns around, it's standing in the yard again. And then it darts off to the other side of his house, and that next day he finds out that his neighbor had an encounter with the creature that same night, and that his neighbor's dog was killed. So I'm not going to go any more of the story, because it actually has 2 or 3, I think it's 2 nights or 3 nights where they were harassed by this creature. But it's a great, interesting story, and I'm going to that was one that I was trying to get done today so I could premiere it on your show, and I might just hold on to it, and we could do another one. I'll give it to you then. But it's a good story, but it's a very, very, very scary story because the actual neighbor next door, and we talk about next door, this is not like New Orleans where you can reach out and touch your neighbor's house. There's a little bit of distance between these houses, but the guy who's his neighbor actually saw his dog get killed and saw his dog get ripped to shreds. So it's crazy. And so who have I talked to about this story? I talked to the father, I've spoken to the son, and I've talked to the neighbor. The wife won't talk about it. She will not discuss it. I'm talking to the father and son, and she's in the background, and she's kind of commenting, yeah, that's what happened, that's what happened. But I said, well, can I talk to her? She won't talk to me about it. And she'll say, I don't want to relive that. I just don't want to relive it. And it just left them alone. There was nothing they could do. It just left them alone. They called the police out, and the police had, people patrolling the neighborhood. The sheriff had people patrolling the neighborhood, but it just decided to leave them alone. So again, why it didn't run through that glass and just eat that whole family, I don't know. When it could have, and then in other cases it has, into people's houses. I don't know why it didn't, but it's a strange cryptid. Like I said, that's why I'm calling it the crypto terrorist. So. Yeah,
and I tend to agree with you on that crypto terrorist thing. They definitely are the crypto terrorists. What's the height and average weight you get of the dog man? I'm sure it's like Sasquatch. It can vary. But I would say just as an average, what are you finding with the height and the weight of these creatures people report to you?
I never really thought about I've never looked at it from that perspective about the average height and weight. But all I can say is consistently, it's been over 7 feet tall and 300 to 325, I would say. Now, there's one account where, and it's kind of hard to say because I don't really say height and weight because what I do is I ask people, my concept in creating the stories is really about the emotions of the person. So I don't say, what was the height and weight of it? I say, can you describe it? How big was it? So I guess to give you a better answer, that would be, that I would feel more comfortable saying is to compare it to other animals. And I've had descriptions of something that was, 7 foot tall that looked like a bear running, but when it stood up, it was 7 foot tall and it had the head of a wolf or a dog. So, and I'm not an outdoorsman, so I couldn't tell you the average weight of a bear, but I would say take 7 foot tall and whatever the weight of a bear is, and that was where you would be. Because I really don't ask that question, what's the height and weight of it? My question is, can you describe it and how did it make you feel? What was going on with your body when you had this encounter? Because my stories are about capturing the human element of these encounters, and it highlights the creatures, and it highlights the crypto, the cryptids, but it really boils down to what happened to the person. So I think that's and I'm not dodging a question, but it's just, that's the best way for me to answer it, to be accurate and to be truthfully and honest with you. You know what I'm saying?
That's the greatest non-answer I've ever heard. I'm just joking. No, I'm just playing with you. No, I get what you're saying. It's you got to let the witness talk. And then this is what I really respect of what you do from what you and I spoke the other night. You and I are kind of kindred spirits in that sense. And I've talked to a lot of other Bigfoot shows, a lot of other Bigfoot researchers, and they kind of they lose that. They lose that perspective of just through the witness eyes. And most witnesses aren't great on height or weight. I kind of do the same thing. Compared to you're 6 foot. How big would you say the creature was toward, compared to you? You kind of start to draw conclusions on it. But I would tend to agree with you. I would say that of the witnesses I've spoke to, anywhere from 6 to 7 feet tall, 300 to 400 pounds is probably your average from the very few witnesses I've actually spoken with. One of the questions I wanted to ask you about the Dogman encounters, what type of vocalizations do you typically get from witnesses that have had these up-close personal encounters?
The number one vocalization that I'm hearing and I've been getting is this growl. That is the way that it's been described. And I think that Ed had the best description of it was the growl is, it's a low rumbling growl, and it lasts anywhere between 10 to 45 seconds. And I don't know what kind of creature can growl that long, but other than Dogman. It lasts for 10 to 45 seconds and it escalates. So it's a low rumbling growl, and then it gets louder and louder and louder and louder. And then there's a vibration that you feel associated with the growl that kind of encompasses your body and goes through your body. Now, the other vocalization is a howling sound. And I actually have some recordings of Dogman howls that are bone chilling. I typically don't share the evidence I get from people, because once you roll out one piece of evidence, then you got to roll out everything else. But I'll send you some of those. And this howling sound is you take the average wolf howl that you would hear, like any movie on any, out in the wilderness, and you amplify it by 20. That's how loud it is. And several of the recordings I have are from inside of people's houses where they put the cell phone to the window, and you can tell it's far off, but you can also tell how that sound is traveling, and it's so loud that it's being picked up on the cell phone to the point to where on the cell phone you would think it was, 100 yards away. But when I ask the person, well, how far away is that? Oh, man, that sounds like it's in the hollow on the other side of such and such. I'm like, wow, So it's the growl, but the growl is the most intimidating thing that people who've experienced it, they say it is the sheer most terrifying thing that they've ever heard in their life. And it instills fear in them. And I think that I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were saying that they believe that the dogmen growl and scare you because it sparks up certain hormones in your body. And if they go to eat you, you taste better. And I was like, well, that's kind of wild. But I started doing some research into it, and it does force you to release certain hormones in your body and into your bloodstream. So it makes sense, but I don't know if that's true. But it's the number one is the growl. Number two is the howling sound. Now, in the C.J. Lockett Ranch story, I touch on the yipping sound that Ed described that would happen around the house when these creatures were communicating. And the actual in the story is coyotes yipping, because that is exactly the sound that he told me. He was like, you know what? It sounds like big coyotes yipping to each other when they're trying to talk. And I was like, talk? And he was like, yeah, it sounds like big coyotes yipping. I'm not from the woods. I've never heard a coyote yip. So what I did was I went and found the coyotes yipping, and I sent it to Ed. And I said, Ed, is this what it sounds like? He was like, yeah, but it's way louder than that, and it's deeper than that. And I was like, okay. So those are three vocalizations. Now, how they communicate, I don't know. I can't answer that question. But he did explain to me that there was a form of communication that they used when the animals were injured, or when the creatures were injured, that they did communicate back and forth. And it wasn't a growl, it was a yip.
Yeah, that is interesting. And that was going to be my next question. Sometimes in these Sasquatch encounters, people will describe the chatter. And I've heard the chatter myself. It sounds like a bunch of chimps chattering back and forth is the best way I would describe it. With regard to the Dogman, have you heard of anyone reporting any sort of chatter, or is it mainly the three that you just mentioned?
It's the three that I mentioned. I haven't heard anybody reporting. Now, I've had some crazy people contact me and say stuff that I just think is so far off the reservation that I kind of tuck it away. And they'll say stuff like, yeah, I heard two dogmen talking, or I saw two dogmen smoking cigarettes on the side of the road. Like, those things I really don't take serious, because it's not consistent with the other things that I've heard. So I've heard people talking about, yeah, dogmen can talk like human beings. I'm like, bro, get off my phone. It's real late and I'm tired and I want to have a glass of wine. So there'll have been those things, but I really don't take those things serious, not serious enough for me to ever really get into it seriously on any kind of show where we're talking about it, because it just doesn't make sense, and it's not consistent with anything I've ever heard. And the only way I look at things as being true, because essentially all these are third-party encounters and accounts, they have to have these true elements involved, right? And they have to consistently have the same elements. One of the elements that is completely consistent across the board is the reaction of the person who's had the encounter. And that reaction is a physical and emotional reaction. And it's consistent. It's either severe chest pain, sweating, feeling nauseous, feeling of doom, like they know they're going to die, and the word evil that you've used. Those things have pretty much been consistent, right? Then there's the consistency in the structure and in the way the animal reacts, either through the consistency of the physical characteristics of the creature, right? And that is one of the varying colors that we know about, the size, and then the description of either a protruding snout. The ears are key, and the eyes are key, and especially the eye shine, which is very, very key. Which the eye shine that I've gotten is a amberish eye shine color over and over and over and over again. Once or twice I got like a more red eye shine color from people, but the amberish eye shine has been something that's been consistent. So I look for these consistencies in the stories from each person who's had the encounter. From the terrorism aspect, tearing the heads off animals and throwing them on people's property, or urinating on equipment that people use for construction, or urinating around someone's house, or showing themselves at your back door but not doing anything, or being on a roof. All these things are things that have been consistent with multiple conversations. The yipping sound is something that came directly from the Siege of Lockett Ranch research and the stories that I've spoken to with Ed. But in order for me to take something serious, it has to fall within this kind of, in this boundary box of what I've already heard. And to say that someone's heard them talking outside of the yipping, it just doesn't fall within that box of, I guess we could say, that margin of error for what people have already told me. I know I'm over speaking, but you kind of get what I'm saying, right?
No. Yeah, no, I get exactly what you're saying. You know, I've talked to people before. I had this one guy one time I spoke to, and he was talking about being followed in the woods by several Sasquatches. And so I'm listening to him talk, and we're about 40 minutes into it. And I stop and ask him, I said, well, what color were the creatures? Because this was like the middle of the day. And the guy says, they were the colors of the rainbow. And I said, what? He goes, yeah, one was pink, one was purple, one was, silver, one was, and he started naming off all these. And as we went farther and farther into his encounter, the more and more I started realizing that this guy believed it happened to him, but there was just too many weird things that were going on that were so outside of your normal encounter that there wasn't much there for me to work with. I wanted to ask you, we've talked about Sasquatch and dogmen being responsible for people being taken. And you've looked into the Sasquatch. Have you spoken with anyone that's had an aggressive encounter with the Sasquatch or been in a bad position with the Sasquatch?
Oh yeah, I have a number of stories from people who've been in some pretty bad situations with Sasquatch. Sasquatch is something to me that, again, I found that a little bit more palatable and believable than the Dogman initially when I started hearing the stories, just because it's not too far-fetched that there could be some kind of giant ape out there that we don't know about, right? So I didn't really find that to be something unbelievable. But I think the freakiest one was submitted by a guy named Steve. And Steve is out of North Arkansas. He actually has given me a whole boatload of stories. And Steve and I go back a ways, and it's on, I think, the 3 scary Bigfoot encounter stories that I have out there. And he talks about him and this guy from LSU. He's a guy who played football for LSU that were out. I think it was in Bull Shoals. You have to forgive me because I do so much of these stories. Sometimes the details get mixed up. I'm pretty sure it's Bull Shoals, Arkansas, and they were along the White River. And they're kind of trudging along looking for a place for a power line to cross over the river. And they're doing soil borings, which is where you stop and you dig into the soil and you drill down into the soil to try and figure out what type of soil is underneath the top surface. And they start hearing the sounds of these bird chirps, like these vocalizations of chirping, but it's way more deep and guttural than, what a normal bird call would be. That's the word I'm looking for, than a normal bird call would be. And as they proceed forward, Steve knows something's going on, but the other guy doesn't. And so they continue moving down the riverbank, and then all of a sudden, a Sasquatch appears and shows himself to them. And I'm leaving out some of the details. You have to go back and listen to the story. And the way it all started was a log is how he described it, not a branch, but a log flies over their heads, and that's how their encounter starts. And he has a weapon on him, and it's a 380. I don't remember the actual brand of 380 it was, but he had a 380 on him, and he was thinking to shoot the creature, but, you know, it was like, what am I going to do with this little bitty gun and shoot this creature? And so they take off running, and the younger guy leaves him. I mean, this guy played football for LSU. He takes off leaving him, and it's trailing them in the wood lines kind of above them because they're at the riverbank and the land kind of elevates up, and it's trailing in the wood line above them. And Steve is an older man, and he starts to have the feelings of having a heart attack. So he just stops running and says, look, man, I'm not going to dive. I'm going to stand my ground and whatever I got to do. But it leaves him alone. It chases the other guy back to the truck. And this encounter is an encounter where the Sasquatch actually makes contact with the truck and physically rams the truck as he's trying to get in it. And he scrambles around and gets into the truck and comes back to get Steve. Now, in that encounter, when Steve first told me about it, I was like, Steve, you know, this is really unbelievable. And I meant it as if, like, I don't believe this. Until I talked to the gentleman who was with him. And that guy's here in New Orleans right now. He goes to the same barbershop as I do. And we spoke outside of the barbershop about it. And when he told me his version of the story, I was like, wow, dude, really? He was like, yeah, man, you know, Steve's not lying. And I'm telling you exactly what happened to me. And he actually got reprimanded by his company because the truck was damaged. And he couldn't go back and tell their bosses that a Sasquatch ran the truck. So they just said that they were trying to get towards the riverbed and the truck ran into some trees in the truck. So that is a very, very aggressive encounter. Steve won't go in that area. And that guy has since got transferred out of working in the woods altogether. And now he works in the city. He won't go into the woods at all. So that's one of the more aggressive encounters that I have had submitted. Now, Steve had some other encounters that were submitted to me where he was out ginsenging in these hollows, and he would run across Sasquatches, but he would just scare it off and go the other way and get away from them. So I have a bunch of Bigfoot stuff coming down the pipeline, and my problem is that it takes me a while to actually bring those encounters to life and make them sound the way they're supposed to sound and make people feel the true emotions. But maybe when I start doing this big drop of Bigfoot, we can do something together, man, and put it all out together.
Yeah, man, I'd love to work with you. I think you do a great job. For anyone out there interested, if you go to YouTube, type in Dark Waters. It's the first guy that pops up, DW. He's got great stories on there. I highly recommend everyone go on there and subscribe. My only complaint is I wish there was more stories that would pump out every day because I really enjoy the channel, man. I'm a huge fan. I really do enjoy the channel. I'm a subscriber myself. So thank you for everything you do, DW, and I really appreciate you being on the show, man.
I know. I appreciate being here as well. And what I would ask of you is that, you know, I really do need resources to talk to these people. So, you know, some of these people that deal with the Sasquatch encounters, I really would like to send them your way just so they can have someone else to talk to. Because at the end of the day, to me, this is not only just telling stories and relating stories, it's a way of helping people. And you have to have people who are qualified, completely qualified to help them understand what's going on and help them kind of get over the trauma that they go through for this. So I might be sending some people your way to talk to you because there's only limitations to what I know about Sasquatch. And that's one thing I've learned is, you know, don't ever kind of, I guess the word is, pass yourself off as authority on something that you don't really know everything about. And, you know, there are people who really are going through some serious traumatic encounters where these things are really bothering them. So I'm going to be sending some people your way to talk to, and it'll probably be good for your show as well, too.
I appreciate it, man. I'm all about collaborating. I really appreciate that.
Awesome, man. Well, I really enjoyed it. I appreciate you so much, man. Thanks for having me on.